The number seemed impossible. Viewership jumped 226% in a single year. Merchandise sales exploded by over 600%. Attendance surged 48%. Social media followers multiplied faster than anyone could track. The league that spent decades begging for attention suddenly couldn't escape the spotlight. But here's what most people don't understand. This explosion didn't happen by accident, and it definitely wasn't just about basketball. The WNBA didn't stumble into relevance. They fought, clawed, and sacrificed for it. And the story of how they got here involves a rivalry that broke the internet, a political rebellion that took down a senator, and a movement that proved activism and profit aren't enemies. They're fuel. The moment that changed everything happened on April 2nd, 2023. LSU versus Iowa, national championship game. Angel Reese had just helped her team demolish Caitlin Clark's Hawkeyes, and as the final seconds ticked away, Reese walked past Clark and made two gestures that would define the next 3 years of women's basketball. First, she waved her hand in front of her face, the same celebration Clark had used earlier in the tournament. Then she pointed to her ring finger, signaling championship glory. The cameras caught everything. Social media erupted. Debates about sportsmanship, race, and respect dominated every sports show for weeks. What nobody realized in that moment was that Reese had just created the most valuable rivalry in women's sports history. The rematch came a year later in the 2024 Elite Eight, and over 18 million people tuned in to watch Clark get her revenge. That number made history. It was the first time a women's championship game drew more viewers than the men's final. But the rivalry was just getting started. When both players entered the WNBA draft in 2024, Clark went first overall to Indiana, Reese 7th to Chicago. Their first professional meeting on June 1st delivered exactly what everyone expected: drama, intensity, and controversy. During the game, Sky guard Chennedy Carter hip-checked Clark hard to the floor. The cameras immediately cut to the Chicago bench where Reese was standing and clapping. The internet lost its mind. Was she celebrating violence? Was this just competitive fire? Reese refused to appear at the post-game press conference and got fined $1,000. 3 days later, she addressed it directly, making it clear the surge in popularity wasn't just about one person. She was right, but the media didn't want to hear it. What they wanted was a villain and a hero, and Reese was willing to play her part. The result? Their matchups became must-watch television. When the Fever played the Sky, viewership tripled compared to games without them. Google searches for WNBA content exploded by over 600%. Clark won Rookie of the Year, but one anonymous voter chose Reese, denying her a unanimous decision. The rivalry wasn't just driving ratings anymore, it was printing money. But while Clark and Reese were building the league's future, the foundation had already been laid years earlier in the most unlikely place: a pandemic bubble in Florida. The 2020 season almost didn't happen. The virus had shut down the world, and the WNBA made a decision that defined their identity forever. They would play, but not for themselves. On July 25, 2020, all 144 players gathered at IMG Academy in Bradenton and dedicated their entire season to Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old medical worker who had been shot in her Louisville apartment by police. Before every game, the players held a 26-second moment of silence, 1 second for each year of Taylor's life. They wore her name on their jerseys. They painted Black Lives Matter across every court. They wore warm-up shirts that read, "Say her name." And week after week, they used their platform to tell the stories of black women killed by law enforcement. Women like Sandra Bland, Michelle Cusseau, and Tanisha Anderson. 144 women making it clear that basketball would take a backseat to justice. The league and the Players Association launched the Justice Movement and created a social justice council to ensure the work would continue beyond one season. Critics said it would hurt viewership. They said fans didn't want politics in sports. They were dead wrong. The boldest move came from inside the Atlanta Dream locker room. The team's co-owner, Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, published a letter condemning the Black Lives Matter movement and calling for American flags on every jersey instead. She claimed the movement advocated for defunding police and disrupting the nuclear family. The players didn't hesitate. Within hours, the WNBA Players Association fired back with a tweet that said it all. ENOUGHOUT. Then they did something unprecedented in professional sports history. They campaigned against their own owner. Dream players Sue Bird and Elizabeth Williams came up with the idea to support Loeffler's Democratic opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock, who was polling at just 9%. They wore shirts with his name. They encouraged fans to vote. They made it personal. When Warnock won the runoff election, it sent shockwaves through American politics. And when the dream was sold to an investment group that included former player Renee Montgomery, making her the first retired WNBA athlete to become an owner and executive, it proved something powerful. These women weren't just talking. They were winning. By 2024, everything had changed. The league that once struggled to fill arenas was selling out stadiums across the country. Caitlin Clark alone was responsible for 26.5% of all WNBA economic activity, merchandise, tickets, television revenue. Her impact was staggering, but she wasn't alone. The Fever's home attendance shattered records with over 340,000 fans in a single season, destroying the previous mark set by New York back in 2001. League-wide, every team posted double-digit attendance growth. The app saw user growth exceed 250%, and in July 2024, the WNBA finalized an 11-year media rights deal worth $2.2 billion, running through 2036. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert announced expansion plans that would bring the league to 18 teams by 2029, adding franchises in Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Investors who had ignored women's basketball for decades were suddenly fighting for seats at the table. The Seattle Storm's valuation hit $151 million, 15 times what it sold for in 2008. The league introduced charter flights for all teams, spending $50 million over 2 seasons to improve travel conditions. This wasn't a bubble. This was a revolution. But growth came with a cost nobody anticipated. In June 2024, Phoenix Mercury star Brittany Griner revealed something disturbing. New fans were showing up to games and screaming racial slurs at players. She didn't appreciate these so-called supporters who thought it was acceptable to yell hateful language at her teammates and opponents alike. The ugly truth was that mainstream attention brought mainstream prejudice. Research showed that media coverage overrepresented white players despite black athletes winning more awards. Players who presented in traditionally non-feminine ways received the least coverage of all. Online harassment escalated. Homophobic attacks multiplied. The league that had always been a safe space for LGBTQ+ athletes suddenly found itself navigating territory that felt hostile and foreign. Some blamed Clark's fan base, though many clarified it wasn't about her personally, but about people weaponizing her success to push their own agendas. The culture clash was real. For decades, the WNBA had been a progressive league supported by a progressive fan base. Now, conservative viewers were tuning in, and not all of them appreciated the social justice messaging. The question became impossible to ignore. Could the WNBA be both a business and a movement? Or would they have to choose? The answer came through action, not words. The WNBA Changemakers Collective, featuring corporate giants like AT&T, CarMax, Google, and Nike, committed to empowering underrepresented groups through sport. They partnered with Voice in Sport to reach over 50,000 girls in 2024 alone. The league timed their Commissioner's Cup championship game to fall one day after the second anniversary of Roe v. Wade being overturned, using the moment to spotlight reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. They partnered with Rock the Vote for massive voter registration drives ahead of the 2024 election. Social Justice Council member Lashia Clarendon made it clear their rights were on the ballot, and they weren't staying silent. The league's commitment to activism didn't soften, it intensified. They knew some fans might walk away. They decided those fans weren't worth keeping. What the WNBA understood, and what critics never grasped, was that their values weren't a liability. They were the product. The league existed because of Title IX, a political act that prohibited gender discrimination in sports. Their very presence was political. Pretending otherwise would be a betrayal of every pioneer who fought for their right to play professionally. The players embraced their role as cultural leaders. Angel Reese started appearing in music videos. Isabel Harrison walked runways at New York Fashion Week. Veterans like Aja Wilson and Breanna Stewart proved you could dominate on the court while building empires off it. The league's 2025 viewer discretion campaign spotlighted personality and intensity, making space for players to define the WNBA on their own terms. These weren't just athletes following a script written by corporate sponsors. They were artists, activists, entrepreneurs, and pioneers. They showed up to games with bold fashion choices. They spoke their minds in press conferences. They built massive social media followings by being authentically themselves. Clark and Reese alone gained 2.5 million new Instagram followers after entering the league, and that didn't include platforms like TikTok where their content went viral constantly. Jersey sales put them ahead of established superstars. Their influence extended far beyond the court, and they knew it. The old model said athletes should shut up and play. The WNBA said that model was dead. What started in 1996 as an 8-team experiment became proof that women's sports could thrive without compromise. The founders, legends like Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops, and Rebecca Lobo, built something that nobody believed would last. They played in half-empty arenas. They fought for respect. They paved roads that didn't exist. A generation later, players like Clark, Reese, Wilson, and Stewart inherited that legacy and took it somewhere the founders could only dream of. Sold-out arenas, billion-dollar media deals, cultural relevance that transcended sports. But they didn't do it by softening their message or hiding their identities. They did it by being loud, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. They proved that activism doesn't kill profit. It creates it. That representation isn't a burden, it's a competitive advantage. That standing for something bigger than yourself doesn't alienate fans. It builds fanatics. The WNBA's rise wasn't about one player or one moment. It was about decades of women refusing to accept limits, demanding respect, and fighting for justice even when it cost them everything. They didn't just change basketball. They rewrote the playbook for how leagues, athletes, and movements can coexist. And they're just getting started.